Allyship is a lot about listening, about what's being asked of you, and hanging back, and being of service too, rather than leading that movement. And, part of that is really reflecting on your privilege. So, whether that's privileges, race or gender, or sexual orientation, or education, or economic resources, we all have these different privileges. And what these privileges do for us is they give us power in certain spaces. And so, part of allyship is really examining privilege. It's really about examining the power that you hold in different spaces, whether that's your companies or whether that's in the political system or even in our social systems. We have power. And it's really important that allies use that power to create change within the systems. So, it's often that people who are excluded from the system, they're not able to make the change because they don't have the power within those systems. So in allyship, we need to recognize what we can control. Maybe that's policy, maybe that's, the way economic resources move. And we have to take on the responsibility of changing those systems that we currently benefit from. And really the end result being that we change these systems and that people who are excluded from them are not only now included in them, but are actually sharing power, that they're influencing the systems that we live and operate within. So it's really about listening, learning, always ongoing, and then figuring out, what you can do within your own positionality to advance the movement, but really working alongside Indigenous people in that and not necessarily making those decisions for yourselves. Safety. Cultural safety is the bare minimum. It is, when I go to work, I feel safe. I feel like I can express my ideas and not experience repercussion. I can feel free of microaggressions. I can feel free to talk about my identity and not experience racism or bias. So that's our bare minimum. I can go to work and feel safe. And currently that's not the case for Indigenous people in the sector. It's not the same everywhere, but people do experience microaggressions or exclusion, and that ultimately will impact their desire to stay in those spaces. So we're starting here. We're doing the work. We're doing the education and the learning, but there's more to be done. So, for example, how are meetings held? There can be differences in terms of worldviews and perspectives and how people hold themselves in spaces. And so, we can look at things like, how do we create meetings so that, not only some voices are being heard, but other voices have the opportunity to be heard? How can policies be written so that people know that there's a safe place for them to express maybe, racism that they are experiencing in the workplace? I think another part of this is how is dialogue happening and what's happening when people do mess up, because allyship isn't about being perfect and doing it perfectly. There's tons of times you will mess up. I like to call it a hot face moment, when you say something or you do something and maybe it gets pointed out to you, or you realize it immediately, and all of a sudden you have that heat just washing over you and your face gets hot. And that will happen. And so, we have to, not try to be perfect, but also take action when we do mess up. So, that's just as important in allyship as starting is, what do you do when you do it wrong? And where do you go? How do you, clean up that mess? How do you apologize? What do you commit to learning more about? What do you change as a result of doing something like that? So, when we think about creating culturally safe work environments, it's, the experience of people within that are, normally excluded from those spaces. And then what is the work that we're doing to create a different kind of environment for them? And a part of that is education and consciousness raising and learning as an organization, but there are going to be, bigger pieces within the workplace that need to be implemented to not just have cultural safety, but to have people feel like they have the opportunity to thrive in that workplace, that they have the opportunity to be a part of, the creation of company culture, the creation of whatever, maybe technology is being created in that space. So let's set safety as the minimum and work towards, an environment where every culture, every worldview, every perspective not only feels the ability to exist, but also, we start to see the inherent benefit of having these different worldviews. Is somebody suppressing their feelings or emotions for another person's sake. And what this can look like, particularly with Indigenous people, when I've probably done it, as well as observed it a lot over the years, is as you're on this learning journey, you're likely learning about the history of Canada, whether you grew up here and you were taught some of these false narratives in school, or maybe you came to Canada and learned these narratives when you arrived. And unlearning some of those things is really uncomfortable. It's deconstructing a world that we thought we lived in. And so you might be feeling a lot of emotions or feelings attached to the unraveling of those narratives. And some associated feelings can be guilt or shame. And I think what I've seen is people taking those feelings of guilt and shame to an Indigenous person. And an example could look like being like, I just learned about residential school, and I'm so upset about it, and I'm really sorry, and I can't believe that happened. And did somebody in your family go? And without realizing it, what that creates is now that Indigenous person is going to have to comfort you. And so it's really important to, when we're feeling those feelings, because they will be there, that we take them to the appropriate place. And, that can look like talking to another aspiring ally and saying, I learned this part of history, and I'm really uncomfortable because maybe, my family lived near this residential school, or whatever that learning is for you. It's taking it to the appropriate place to express it. It's not ignoring it, because that will also have impacts in terms of maybe becoming immobilized, or maybe wanting to step away from the movement. So it's really important to address them, but in the appropriate place. And then another part of emotional labor that we see is in terms of the education piece. And so, obviously you're in this program to learn more, and you're starting to learn a part of that history. And often, you might meet an Indigenous person, maybe as an educator in this course, or maybe at a conference, or maybe in your company, and you want to ask more questions. And I always encourage people to think, can I Google this first? Because there's a lot of really great information. There's resources on the internet. There's amazing Indigenous authors and filmmakers. And, it is a part of allyship to do the learning first. There is that call to educate ourselves.